Hey, what is up, mortals? It is Bone Loss here with a new video for you. Welcome to the very first part of What If Deku Had the Rinnegan. I just wanted to greet you guys by saying sit back and relax. You're in for a treat. So we begin. The day Izuku's story began was also the day it ended. I'm sorry, kid, but you don't have a quirk. It's best you give up. Hearing those words, Izuku's heart shattered instantly into a million tiny pieces. How could it not? His dream had, from the moment he had learned about them, to become a hero, like the idol he worshipped, All Might. All his life, he'd waited eagerly for the manifestation of his quirk. For the day he'd take the first definitive step into the bright future he'd daydreamed about for so long. A future that had just been extinguished by a few brief words from the doctor. There wasn't much he remembered after that. It hurt to think about it for more than a second, like the news would take longer to sink in, even to a child. He stared out the window on their way back, his eyes wide and his hands trembling around the All Might toy he'd held onto with all his strength. Yes, on that day, Izuku's story as a hero, as he had imagined it before that day, had most definitely ended.
Mom, do you still think I could be a hero? Like All Might?
Inko collapsed to her knees at that, the grief in her face as clear as anything he had ever seen, and held him tight while speaking into his shoulder.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
And his heart broke a little more then. Because that wasn't what he wanted to hear. Holding tightly to his mother's shirt, the child cried and cried and cried. Holding tightly to her son's small body as he sobbed, the mother cried and cried and cried. And neither of them noticed the third shadow in the room, who watched the scene unfold with something akin to interest, with a single blazing red eye. Not until they both blacked out. After that, waking up was a slow endeavor. The room around them was wrecked. That was the first thing that Inko Midoriya thought of. The second, of course, was, oh my god, what happened to my son? The last thing she remembered was desperately trying to comfort the crying boy. What had happened? She didn't know, but the pulsing headache in the back of her head told her it wasn't anything good. Still, she turned her gaze to the right and, to her relief, found that her son was still there. Izuku looked no worse for wear, if you ignored the fact he was clearly unconscious and had knocked over most of the furniture in the room somehow. And he was still breathing. Thank God he was still breathing. She scurried over to Izuku and placed her hands on his body, trying to gently shake him awake. And it worked, as the boy soon groaned softly and sat up, clutching at his head with a hand like he was covering his eyes up.
Mom?
He called out, his voice a little groggy.
I'm here, sweetie. Are you okay? What happened?
She asked the boy.
I don't know. I think I'm fine.
Izuku rubbed at his face with the back of his hand a bit, turning to look at her with wide, terrified eyes.
But my eyes kinda hurt.
Wide, terrified, purple eyes with ripple-like patterns across the entire thing, like there was no separation between the pupil and the sclera. They looked strange, almost alien, especially when compared to the rest of her Izuku's face. Inko resisted the urge to gasp.
Izuku, darling, I think we may need to see the doctor again.
And thus, the story began anew. In the end, the whole thing had been labeled a miraculous form of late quirk manifestation, an absolute wonder, according to the doctor, who clearly hadn't given up on the pinky joint model. According to him, Izuku must have been so distraught that he forced his own quirk factor into activating. A miracle. Inko was worried. Something didn't seem right. But Izuku? He was ecstatic. Here was his quirk. His power, unique and cool looking. He would stare at his eyes for hours at a time, wondering what secrets they were hiding from him. Up until that point, they hadn't really done anything. Just looked cool. But Izuku had faith. Now, would Izuku still be bullied? I believe so, but not to the same extent. Instead of Deku, which meant useless in canon, this Izuku received a much simpler nickname from Bakugo. Freaky Eyes. Still, though, Bakugo and his lackeys still tormented him for his useless quirk. Izuku fared much better in terms of his interactions with the rest of the world. Useless quirks were considerably more common than being quirkless, after all, and thus didn't deal with nearly as strong a stigma. Still, Izuku never gave up hope. There was more to his quirk than meets the eyes. He knew it. And, as fate would have it, he was right, as would be proven on a very fateful day. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. With the service Skillshare provides, you can get access to many in-depth tutorial videos on basically anything you want to learn. Each class that they have is bound to help you with your creative endeavors. Do you want to learn how to make videos like this one? Do you want to learn how to write scripts or edit audio? Skillshare has you covered. And with our link, you can have a 14-day free trial. So what are you waiting for? Click the link now and get 14 days worth of classes free. Link in the description below. Now, some may say walking through a shady, deserted tunnel on your way home was a terrible choice and just plain irresponsible. Being perfectly honest, they'd be right in saying so. There was a new villain like every other week, after all. But Izuku really couldn't bring himself to care on that day, too disheartened by the events that still haunted his mind. The short, green-haired boy muttered to himself, something akin to a scowl on his face as he walked. Though his disposition was usually quite sunny, Izuku couldn't help but feel as if it was fair for him to be sullen after an entire classroom took to mocking him for his dream. Kachan had always targeted him more than other kids, but to be laughed at for having a dream felt cruel. His hands tightened around the straps of his backpack, and his eyes narrowed in frustration, though a bit shadowed by curly locks of green hair that fell over his brows. His quirk wasn't useless, he told himself. He just hadn't figured it out yet. And who could blame him? There were so many possibilities. There were at least 5 quirk theories for Izuku's future notebooks, usually laid just beside his hero notes for the future books he valued so dearly. He'd tried everything, from breathing fire to controlling gravity, and each time he'd felt something stir. Like he could do those things, but just didn't know how. It wasn't his fault his quirk was so unintuitive. Being that absorbed by his thoughts, Izuku continued on his way, and failed to notice the darker shadow cast over his frame by a figure looming just behind him. Failed to notice it.
Well, what do we have here? A disguise in just the right size.
Until it was way too late. His heart quickened and his eyes widened. He knew it before he had any evidence. This was a villain. The malevolent voice told him as much. His heartbeat drummed in his ears like thunder, blood flowing as adrenaline began being produced. And despite himself, Izuku turned to look at the figure by instinct. With a horrible squelching sound, the creature lunged at him. Slime covered his elbows and flowed at his face, covering his face and entering his nose while tendrils held him down by his arms and legs. He was surrounded, immobilized, about to die. I can't breathe, Izuku thought, his eyes wide as he clawed desperately at the slime. The thick substance gave away under his desperate fingers, but otherwise didn't budge. There was just too much of it everywhere. I'm going to die, he concluded.
Relax, kid,
The creature said to him, its disgusting teeth parting like it was opening its mouth as the villain gazed at him with its one huge eye.
I'm just going to wear your body for a bit, so cool it. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds.
And then I'll die, his mind supplied helpfully as he struggled. But he couldn't die yet! He wasn't a hero yet! He hadn't figured out his quirk yet! He wasn't ready to die! He didn't want to die! Faintly, he heard a sound nearby, like someone's voice, loud and deep, but Izuku couldn't process it. The sound of his heart in his ears was too loud, the rushing of his blood too quick, and all throughout this he thought, I'm going to die! Something in his mind clicked. Instinct supplied him with the words he needed. So muffled and desperate, Izuku muttered just 2 simple words. Shinra Tensei. And suddenly, the world exploded, and so did his conscience. The last thing he saw before fainting was the very concrete around him giving away and being shattered. He woke up to the remarkable sensation of having his face repeatedly slapped without force. The sky was bright overhead, with clouds lazily flying by. He felt dirt and stone under his back, poking him at uncomfortable spots. Blinking twice, Izuku let himself groan in confused dissatisfaction. What? And then he saw who had been slapping him. All Might. The All Might! Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god! Thank goodness you're okay! The familiar booming voice of All Might greeted him, alongside the smile he'd spent so many hours staring at. This wasn't a dream! His mind supplied, this was really happening! Needless to say, Izuku screamed. Ah ha ha ha! And so lively too! Izuku scurried back in odd confusion and found that any attempt at saying something was completely annihilated by the roaring flux of his blood. He'd almost died, then was saved by All Might! Oh my god! The tall hero grinned at him, nodding once. I apologize for getting you involved in villain cleanup, young man, he announced with a booming voice. I must have faltered, too excited by this unfamiliar land. But I'm not always this way, worry not!
I apologize, he stuttered in shock. No, it's fine. Thank you. I mean, it's not fine. I mean, it is because you saved me. Thank you.
There was a pause. All Might looked at him. The All Might was looking at him! But there was something wrong. For some reason, the hero looked confused and concerned. Saved you? All Might repeated. I apologize precisely because I did not, my boy. You saved yourself with your quirk. And what a powerful quirk it is! Though it is unlawful to use your quirk in public, I believe your circumstances more than explain the necessity. Either way. But Izuku interrupted him, sitting up straight.
What? My quirk? What do you mean? My quirk doesn't really do anything yet. It just gives me weird eyes.
All Might faltered. Doesn't. Another pause. Could it be you didn't know?
Didn't know what?
He questioned the man. My boy, take a good look around you.
At the tunnel? Okay.
That's right. He'd been at the tunnel before. So why could he see the sky? Slowly, he looked around, and his heart stuttered to a stop, dropping to his stomach at the sight he saw. There was no tunnel anymore, or at least not much left of it. Instead, pieces of concrete and stone were scattered around, with the ceiling having partially collapsed on the two ends that were still left. The dirt under him was that which laid under the concrete, and the small rocks and dust he had on his uniform told him exactly where said concrete had ended up. It was like someone had violently blown up a good 80% of the tunnel.
What? Are you telling me that?
You did this, yes, the hero confirmed. You truly didn't know of your quirk's capabilities? 'Twas surely a fortuitous time for it to show itself, but I believe you should look for a quirk counselor, my boy. Such a destructive force field as the one you wielded. It would make you a powerful hero, but only if you can control it. It would make you a powerful hero, his mind repeated. Him. A hero. Izuku looked down at his hands, looked at the tremendous destruction around him, and despite everything, felt his lips curl into a smile. Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed. Before you leave, we would just like to let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below.